on Saturday night. The 30 on 30 ESPN special on OJ, you'll see lots of my pictures. You'll know which ones they are.
Thank you so much. The third speaker tonight, last but certainly not least, is Ms. Dara Lovitz. I've mentioned her. I'm excited to have her as part of our panel too, because she's the author of Muzzling Movement: The Effects of Anti-terrorism Law, Money, and Politics on Animal Activism. And I shared with her that I actually relied on that book heavily for a paper that I wrote for my own Con Law 2 paper on the Animal Enterprises Terrorism Act several years ago. Ms. Lovitz is an adjunct professor of animal law at Temple University Beasley School of Law. She also advises local activists on animal issues and was appointed special prosecutor by the district attorney to prosecute a pivotal Pennsylvania animal cruelty case against an egg facility in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Ms. Dara Lovitz is co-founder of the nonprofit organization Peace Advocacy Network. And so, without further ado, all the way from Philly.
I want to start with a little quiz, and if you get an answer right, you can have an extra tofu skewer in the back, courtesy of the New York City Bar Association. Here's my first question. What is this? What are you looking at? Gestation crate. Good. Well, the one on the left is a gestation crate for the pig while she's pregnant, and the one on the right is called a harrowing crate, and it's for when she's nursing. It's slightly larger than the gestation crate, but as it sounds like most of you know, gestation crates are very confining situations for a pig to be in. She cannot turn, she can hardly move her head. The intensive confinement makes her so nuts that she chews on the bar and bangs her head against the bars. And then as soon as she's finished nursing, she gets impregnated again and goes back to the gestation crate. Do you know what this is?
Does that grind the
Yeah, it does. It does. The technical term, and you'll never need to know this, is a waste hopper with built-in macerator. This you'll find at an egg-laying hen facility, and it is designed to grind up these little guys, baby male chicks, and they're ground alive. They're not ground dead. They're ground up so they can be killed easily and quickly. Why would you grind up these cute little baby chicks? There's no use for them, right? They are so cute, but they're male, so they are not going to lay eggs. And they're male, but they're never going to grow to be a big chicken that you can cut meat off of efficiently. The chickens humans eat are broiler chickens. They're bred to be really fat and large so that there's more meat for their tiny little legs to carry along with them, and that's efficiency, is to grow a big bird. You get more meat per bird. These little guys are too skinny, not efficient, so they're either ground up in a macerator, or some of the birds en masse are put into a large garbage bag, asphyxiated, and that's how they meet their death. Next question. What's this? Whose nose is that? A cow's nose, a baby cow's nose. Why would a baby cow have a spiked nose ring?
And they don't nuzzle each other, the baby cows?
Good. It's to prevent, as far as the industry is concerned, to prevent the baby from nursing. The spikes irritate, as you can imagine, the lactating mother. The spikes hit the udder, and the mother cow rejects the baby. She kicks him away and rejects him, so he can't drink his mother's milk. At some point in human history, we decided that human breast milk wasn't enough. As soon as our kids stopped nursing from humans, our kids should start nursing from cows. And so we feed our cows, our human babies, cow breast milk, which is really designed naturally for baby cows. And we wonder why there's an obesity epidemic. We're feeding the milk from a mama cow that's designed to turn a little baby calf into a 3,000-pound cow. We're feeding that milk to our human babies and wondering why, again, there's an obesity problem in this country, or in really across the world now. But anyway, so that spiked nose ring is designed to prevent the baby cow from nursing. Now, most baby cows don't actually even have the opportunity to be denied his mother's milk, because most baby cows are taken away from their mothers. They're separated at birth, and the males are taken to veal farms and then the females are taken to another part of the farm so that they can become impregnated by anal penetration with the farmer's hand. He has an insemination rod that goes into her rectum so he can reach her uterus. But anyway, so it's really not a nice fate for a baby cow, whether you have a spiked nose ring or not. No matter what, you are denied your mother's nurturing, which in the mammal kingdom is a very important thing to have. Okay, in the last 5 minutes, this question would have gone differently with a different audience, but has anyone learned anything, at least one, raise your hand if you learned at least one thing you didn't know in the last 5 minutes? Okay, great. That's why the First Amendment is so important. And that's why these ag-gag laws cannot stand on the books. They prevent us from learning. They prevent us from seeing these images that we need so that we can develop a consciousness and understand what goes on behind the opaque walls of all the farms out there. So I'm going to, that brings me to my agenda for today, which is we're going to start out with the First Amendment. Thankfully, Mickey covered a lot of it, so I'm not going to go into as much detail, which is good because I over-planned and I have too much to talk about anyway. I'll also talk about eco-terror and the terrorist label, and then the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act. So starting off with the First Amendment, as you know, this is what the First Amendment says. It's designed to protect dissent. It's not designed to protect the majority opinion. The First Amendment isn't designed to protect President Obama when he's talking about universal health care. It's designed to protect the people who are protesting outside with signs that say Obamacare is the end of the world. So it's designed to protect the dissent, the minority opinion. And as Mickey mentioned, it cannot be content-based. There cannot be viewpoint discrimination. So in this opinion of the Supreme Court, suppression of speech based on its content completely undercuts the profound national commitment to the principle that debate on public issues should be uninhibited, robust, and wide open. You never want to judge in the position of saying, I don't agree with that message, I will not allow that, and oh yes, I like what they're saying, I'll allow that speech. You don't want the judge in that position, so we just have a blanket rule that says all speech is acceptable, except for these reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions, but a judge is not in the position to judge the value, to judge the message on the placard. And then, importantly for us, how far do we want First Amendment free speech rights to go? Noam Chomsky said, if we don't believe in freedom of expression for people we despise, we don't believe in it at all. If you don't believe in freedom of expression for the people you despise, then you don't believe in freedom of expression at all. Which brings me to these people. This is a group of people who stands outside of military funerals, and they hold signs that say, God hates the USA, thank God for dead soldiers, thank God for IEDs, God hates your tears, God hates fags, God hates fag enablers. Do you know what group this is? Westboro Baptist Church, yes. And like I said, they stand outside of military funerals, and in 2011, the United States Supreme Court said they are allowed to stay and stand outside of military funerals. Quote, the content of Westboro's placards highlighted issues of public import, the political and moral conduct of the U.S. and its citizens, the fate of the nation, homosexuality in the military, and Westboro conveyed its views on those issues in a manner designed to reach as broad a public audience as possible. Speech is powerful. It can stir people to action, move them to tears of both joy and sorrow, and inflict great pain. We cannot react to that pain by punishing the speaker. As a nation, we have chosen a different course, to protect even hurtful speech on public issues, to ensure that we do not stifle public debate. That's the First Amendment. This case, Snyder v. Phelps, is very important to the animal rights movement, not for the reasons you might suspect. I'm not suggesting this case is important to the animal rights movement because it says that animal rights activists now have the right to say what they want and the government won't shut them down. I'm not saying that at all, in fact. This case is very important for a different reason, which I will get to later. That's a teaser, just stay tuned. Next is eco-terror and the terrorist label. Eco-terror, what does that sound like? What's eco? What's the prefix eco? Environment, yeah, it sounds like ecology, environment, good. And then terror to instill fear in someone. Now, eco-terrorists, the original eco-terrorists were environmentalists, the ones who would sit up in trees and protest the logging industry. With the Animal and Ecological Terrorism Act, animal rights activists were brought into that definition. So now the government considered eco-terrorists to be anyone who was defending the earth or defending animals. And I want to talk about the inaccuracy of the term, calling animal rights activists terrorists. According to the federal government, violence is a necessary component in the definition of terrorism. And I personally cannot think of a more nonviolent group than animal rights activists whose main principle is based on ahimsa, which is in Sanskrit means non-injury, but it's the idea of non-harm to any human or animal. It's just it's a peaceful philosophy, it's a nonviolent philosophy. So the quintessential principle in animal rights is to not be violent. And yet, again, according to the federal government, a terrorist has to be violent. It's a necessary component. Does anyone know what the Animal Liberation Front is? ALF? Okay. It's a group of underground activists that break into fur farms or pharmaceutical labs, and they release the animals. The federal government considers them to be one of the #1 domestic, most threatening domestic terrorist groups in the country. Why? Because they cause a lot of property damage and a lot of economic damage. If they break into a pharmaceutical lab, not only are they breaking the locks and rescuing the animals, they're destroying computers and all the tools of abuse in the pharmaceutical lab with the idea that they want to prevent future abuse. It's very expensive when pharmaceutical research gets interrupted, so it causes a lot of economic damage. The value of those animals that are being stolen, depending on the animals, is great. So these groups feel very threatened and they get the federal government involved. But anyway, that's why they're considered so dangerous and so threatening, because they cause a lot of money, economic damage. But they're rescuing animals. My point in telling you this is the ALF, this very dangerous group which the federal government is just trying to get, and they're doing a terrible job because they can never find the underground activists. Their guidelines, the ALF guidelines, #1, to liberate animals from places of abuse and place them in good homes where they may live out their natural lives free from suffering. Ooh, dangerous. #2, to inflict economic damage to those who profit from the misery and exploitation of animals. Well, that's dangerous to a company that wants to make money. #3, to reveal the horror and atrocities committed against animals behind locked doors by performing nonviolent, did you hear that? Nonviolent direct actions and liberations. And #4, to take all necessary precautions against harming any animal, human and non-human. So the most dangerous, scariest group of animal liberationists, their main principle is that you may not harm anybody, whether it's an animal or a human. So this is the terrorist. The person who doesn't want to harm anybody is the terrorist, according to the federal government. Other characteristics of terrorists are they have conspiratorial cell structures, they take hostages, they harm persons, not property. And then CBRN is chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear warfare. None of this is quintessential or even exists in the animal rights movement. So I claim that eco-terror is a fallacy. It is absolutely absurd to call peaceful, nonviolent animal rights activists who are just trying to save more lives, to call them terrorists is insulting. The Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act, raise your hand if you've heard of it. Raise your hand if you know what it is. Okay, so I don't want to be too repetitive, but it's a law that criminalizes the behavior of animal rights activists, and it criminalizes it to the level of terrorism. Now, what do I mean by activities by an animal activist? Pretty much everything that an animal rights activist might do could fall under this act. It is very broadly written. Anything you do to cause economic harm or harm to the animal enterprise or a person working for the animal enterprise, that's a federal crime of terrorism. What is an animal enterprise? Pretty much anything, commercial, academic organization that uses or sells animals or animal products for profit, food, fiber production, agriculture, education, research, zoos, aquariums, pet stores, organizations that host any event intending to advance agriculture sciences. Almost anything is an animal enterprise. In Philly, we have Bed Bath & Beyond. Do you have that in New York?
Yes.
Okay. Is Bed Bath & Beyond an animal enterprise? Yeah. Why? They sell, I don't know about your Bed Bath.
Down comforters.
They sell down comforters, down pillows, they sell leather chairs, they sell animal products. That's how broadly this statute is. And as constitutional law experts know, the broader a statute is, the more likely it is to be unconstitutional, because you're going to encompass things that you should not. Not only is it broad in whom it protects, it's broad in whom it prosecutes, because almost any activity can harm an animal enterprise, any activity on behalf of animal rights. The problems with this statute, viewpoint discriminatory. There's no legal analog for for Democrats, for Republicans, for Mothers Against Drunk Driving, for any other social justice or political action group, there's no law that says that you can't do it. You can't protest, you can't cause economic harm to your political enemy. Here's an example of how it might play out. Let's say a pro-gun activist crosses state lines and spray paints on a building, gun control is bad, or don't take away my guns, or something like that. That's a crime, right? And that person, if caught, would be prosecuted for vandalism and trespass, probably, property damage. Let's say you're an animal rights activist and you cross state lines and you spray paint on a building, the guy who lives here is a puppy killer, or go vegan, or anything. That's crossing state lines, and you're hurting an animal enterprise, the animal enterprise that sells food, the person who lives there, or the pharmaceutical lab that's testing on animals. So it's really the same act. It's spray painting, it's vandalism. But the guy who did it on behalf of gun rights is going to get a slap on the wrist. It's a misdemeanor. He'll be tried in state court. The guy who does it on behalf of animal rights has committed a federal felony, a crime of terrorism, and could face time in prison for that. So that's viewpoint discrimination, when it's the message that's being prosecuted. And here the message is animal rights, then you might be a felon, you might be a terrorist. But any other message, no, that's fine, we're just going to prosecute you for the lower state crime. Why is it different? What's the difference between state crimes and federal crimes? Why, if you chose to be a defendant, why would you want to be a state defendant and not a state brought in federal court?
Every state has different laws.
Every state has different laws, right? How about the prosecution method? First of all, federal defendants...
Federal covers everything. No matter what that other state wants to do or not do, federal just covers everything.
Covers everything. There's a grand jury system, which is designed to be completely unfair to the defendant. The rules of evidence don't apply. You can't have your attorney in the room with you. Federal U.S. attorneys, when they try cases, they have pretty much like 1 or 2 cases that they're working on in a time period. State district attorneys have like 90 to 100 cases. Well, you would know. How many cases do you have when you show up at preliminary hearings? You have a lot of cases that so you really can't put as much into each case. So if I were a defendant, I'd much rather have no offense, I'd much rather have an assistant district attorney prosecuting me than a U.S. attorney who has federal agents who can testify for them, not the state district attorney who tries to get a cop to testify and the cop doesn't show up. So federalizing what are really state crimes, these low-level property crimes, they're just misdemeanors technically under the state crime codes. Now they become felonies, and you have a federal prosecutor on the other side, which is your chances of success and of acquittal is much less. Terrorism designation, you are a terrorist if you are convicted of an Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act, you are put on the no-fly zone. And then it silences further animal activism. People don't want to be felons. They don't want to have to put on their future job applications that they were convicted of a felony and they spent some time in prison. So this does silence the animal rights movement, this Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act. How is it applied? It was applied in the Shack case. Has anyone heard of Shack? US v. Shack? Shack stands for Stop Huntington Animal Cruelty, SHAC. Huntington being Huntington Life Sciences, which is a pharmaceutical lab causing torture and harm to billions of animals. Originally in the UK, but a branch of Huntington Life Sciences came to Jersey, and that's when Shack USA started. These 6 individuals surrounding the picture and in the picture are the leaders of Shack USA, were the leaders of Shack USA. They were prosecuted under the Animal Enterprise Protection Act, which is the predecessor to the AETA. And what did they do? Well, first of all, to target Huntington Life Sciences, they decided the best way to do it is to target money. So they did what's called tertiary targeting. And they tried to they protested outside the investors' homes, the people who invested in Huntington Life Sciences, and slowly investors were taking their money out of HLS, Huntington Life Sciences. And once they started to really lose a lot of money, they got the federal government involved to bring together this case against Shack, against the activists. There was no evidence brought up at trial that these 6 individuals did anything illegal. There was no evidence that these 6 individuals did anything illegal. Now, people did illegal things on behalf of Shack, like throwing paint on a car or yelling puppy killer too close to somebody's home, but these individuals didn't do those things. Members of Shack did. These individuals ran the group and had a website. What was on the website? The names and addresses of the investors that they encouraged people to go to their homes and in protest. A communique page where other activists would post things that they did, some of which was illegal, but Shaq wrote on the page, we do not condone illegal activity, but we're not going to censor you. So those communiques were put up on the website, and these 6 individuals were prosecuted. Here's a bonus question again. There's a tofu skewer at stake for this. Who was the U.S. attorney in the U.S. v. Shaq case? Someone who's kind of famous now. No. Someone who's the governor of the state of New Jersey. Chris Christie. Good. U.S. Attorney Chris Christie prosecuted the activist, the Shaq activist, and if we had time, I would tell you about all the things he did that were procedurally unfair, and I blame him, but I also blame the judge for allowing it. But anyway, so they were prosecuted. Again, no evidence they did anything criminal, that they did any crime. It was all circumstantial evidence based on their group, and you are not allowed to be prosecuted under the law based on the activities of the people with whom you associate. But whatever. So they were convicted under the Animal Enterprise Protection Act. Their lawyers had a clear-cut case for a major constitutional issue. They appealed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. Third Circuit affirmed the District Court of New Jersey. The lawyers filed for writ with the Supreme Court of the United States, and the Supreme Court of the United States denied cert. Why? Because they had 2 First Amendment cases on their roster that they could have done, and they're not going to write 2 major First Amendment opinions. So they had a choice. They could protect the free speech rights of animal rights activists and write an opinion, a First Amendment opinion on U.S. v. Shaq, or they could write an opinion protecting the free speech rights of these a-holes. And so the Supreme Court chose Snyder v. Phelps. And it's full circle, so that's why I brought this up again. This is the case that prevented the United States Supreme Court from opining and writing an opinion that would support the free speech rights of animal rights activists. So the laws that remain on the books are, number 1, you have the right to yell hurtful, homophobic messages at military funerals. Go crazy. But number 2, if your message is about veganism or against animal torture, your message is not worthy of First Amendment protection, which is why I called this session the First Amendment and the Silencing of the Animal Rights Movement. Thank you.
Before we open it up for questions to all 3 of our speakers, we'll take 1 or 2 questions that specifically address Dara and what she just. Any specific questions related to the Animal Activism Terrorism Act?
I may have missed this point, but in regards to an issue about protesting, let's say, outside of Whole Foods, about all the products they sell, animals and whatnot, could that be, what's the status of that? I mean, maybe it's a state thing for New York, but I'm just curious.
No, whether it's, what would be the status if you wanted to protest outside of Whole Foods and have, about humane, the fallacy of humane, the humane myth or whatever. Okay, so the status is something about the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act. There's a savings clause that says that despite all the language in this statute, we do not prohibit your right to peaceably assemble and anything protected under the First Amendment. The problem is even the language itself in the AETA intimidates. For instance, if you intimidate somebody who works for an animal enterprise, that encompasses First Amendment activity. So it's kind of a fallacy that there's a savings clause. It's to no effect. If somebody was arrested and prosecuted under the AETA for that, it would be thrown out, I think. There was a group that...
What if it snowballs and you cripple their business?
Right, it could hurt their business, but it might fall under the savings clause as peaceable assembly. You're outside in a public space, you're not on their private property, and yeah, technically you're causing economic harm, which violates the words of it, but nobody is going to be dumb enough to bring that case because the reason that prosecutors might not want to bring these cases because it gives courts the opportunity to say this can't be interpreted this way, and it makes it a smaller and smaller law. There was a case, U.S. v. Buddenberg, where these activists were chalking messages about animal testing in a university setting. And they were indicted under the Animal and Enterprise Terrorism Act, but there was a great opinion that said there's not enough evidence here. They didn't do anything wrong. They were just doing First Amendment protected stuff, like drawing on the sidewalk. So that was an opinion that was bad for the prosecutors in that case. Now law enforcement doesn't feel like they can arrest animal activists who do that. So that I think would be protected in the same way that chalking was protected. Or if there was an indictment, it would just be thrown out. I wouldn't worry. I think that's the kind of thing that's done enough.
Is there a way that you can define where the line is, or is it that?
That's the problem. Here's how I would define the law, the line, but it's not. This isn't accurate. But if you cause major economic damage, no offense, but standing outside of Whole Foods isn't going to cause major economic damage. You might reach a couple people, but it's when you cause huge damage. If you talk to investors of Whole Foods and you ask them to pull out, you do some major campaign that causes major financial harm, that's the problem. That's when companies start getting federal government involved. And that's when these statutes were written, because pharmaceutical companies and fur farms were losing a lot of money. And that's when they got the feds involved. And if you're not really causing major economic harm, I think you're safe. Like, what's the point?
Which also, just to follow up with that, so the Shat case, I mean, one of the reasons why people don't know that this law exists is because it's not used very often.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the Shat case, and then, which was the pharmaceutical, and more recently, there was a case where there was at least talk about using it against the couple that was going across country and releasing, going to fur farms.
They were prosecuted.
Yeah, they were prosecuted.
And they pled guilty to, for a lesser
Okay, can you talk, because that's the other, so, because you did mention pharmaceuticals and fur, where there's a lot of money at stake.
Right.
And so this couple, essentially the facts were that they were going and they were releasing these minks.
Yeah, I just want to get the exact, because it was in May, it was last month that they actually were sentenced to 2 years, well, one of them was sentenced to 2 years of federal prison for violating AETA. But they were crossing state lines, so then you're brought under federal jurisdiction, releasing minks from fur farms. And so it was causing a lot of economic damage, and they were arrested. Now, one of them was Joseph Buddenberg, if you remember from US v. Buddenberg. He was one of the first activists who was prosecuted under the AETA for chalking, and that was dismissed. In this case, he was releasing animals from a fur farm, a much more expensive endeavor for the industry than chalking outside of a university building. So he was just sentenced to 2 years of federal prison, and his partner, Nicole Cassane, she was indicted last July. Her sentencing hasn't happened yet, so we don't know how much time she'll get. But that's the most recent prosecution under the AETA.
Right, so do you think that this more recent prosecution then will open it up potentially where we'll see some movement and try to get it in front of the Supreme Court?
I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with this, or if it's a good enough case. You want a really good case where the facts are really on your side. I mean, what they did was very criminal. They broke the law. There's a lot of property damage involved, a lot of theft. So I'm not sure if it's a good free speech platform for a free speech case. Chalking is great for free speech. Vandalism that has a message is good for free speech. But this is stealing animals and releasing them in the wild, so I'm not sure it's the best platform. I think the animal rights movement, if we were all one group that was united, we would probably say, let's not use this one as the platform.
Right, so, and sticking with the fur farm situation for one more, question. So, I'm thinking about a particular photographer, Joanne MacArthur, who was featured in the movie Ghost in the Machine, which came out.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so, but one of the things that she does is she goes onto the premises and takes photographs of these animals, and she doesn't release them. So she's got these really startling pictures of these animals in fur farms in the middle of the night. And she will take pictures because she feels like that's her activism, so she's okay with leaving them there, and so she leaves them there. But the point is that her photographs become part of a book called We Animals, become part of a movie, right? And so, but you'd still have to probably then prove significant, make the connection of the economic harm in order for her to get in trouble under the AETA.
Right, I think it's probably too attenuated. And that also, that looks like a free speech issue that they might not touch because they'd be fearful of an opinion that would go against their right to protect themselves. In other words, would be supportive of free speech. But yeah, it sounds like an ag-gag violation, if anything.
Wherever it takes place.
Yeah, depending what state she's in. Thankfully, there aren't, I think only 6 states have ag-gag laws on the books.
But so when we're looking at ATA, we're really looking at these places where there's big money at stake, not like protesting outside of Petco because there's still.
Right, I mean, my beef, forgive me for the term, with this law is that it could encompass things and it scares people away from doing things that they're probably not gonna get arrested under. And what I try to tell audiences is don't be fearful of going out and doing vegan outreach and what's, if it smells like First Amendment protected activity to you, do it. You're most likely not gonna get arrested. It's the kind of activism that's really inhibited by this, and I hope it's not the free speech stuff, but it's more the rescuing animals and the Animal Liberation Front kind of actions, the direct actions that's at stake. And as a vegan, that's very sad to me that these animals aren't going to be saved and people aren't going to go out there because they're fearful of this major prosecution. Whereas before they could just get, a lot of people are willing to be prosecuted for a state crime, a low-level misdemeanor. People are willing to risk their record for that. But it's a different story, and not as many people are willing to risk being prosecuted as a federal terrorist.
Okay.
And that's a perfect example of the chilling effect that these kind of laws have on the First Amendment. When you hear that word, it's like quarterbacks hearing footsteps, back of them. It's the same type thing. It's like the fact that you may be prosecuted. So do you really want to do something like this? And that's what we have to protect against.
Right. And so we don't want to scare people, our audience tonight, from if you see something that's happening that you want to take a picture of or something,
Right, I risk being part of the silencing effect by talking about the AETA the way I do. And I definitely don't want to scare 99% of activism, and I engage in it too. 99% of the activism that we do
So if
is
you run
fine.
around and tear down signs of, let's say, Caporus, where it's going to be, is that disrupting?
It is, and it's technically a violation because you're
It's in public
interfering.
space, so it's a sign illegally put up in the public
If it's a
space.
low-level property crime, like a property damage kind of thing, technically, yes. If you cross state lines, there are other elements to it. But again, will you be prosecuted? No. No one's going to waste time on that.
One more question in the back, and then we're going to open it up in the time that we have remaining. And we do have about, looks like 15 minutes or so for questions.
Let me just mention this, because this is very important tonight. We need to do more of this. We need to get more politically involved. Domestic violence and animal abuse is escalating. Now I have a question. There are some kids that are brought up to hunt, to trap, and to skin animals. How do you draw the distinction from a kid that's growing up in that environment versus somebody like a Jeffrey Dahmer or a kid like that? Because they're kind of like doing almost the same thing, but their values, that are being brought up by parents are much different.
Right, and that's a very complicated question that takes into not just parenting but culture and cultures. Here in New York we see different cultures from borough to borough, neighborhood to neighborhood. But I would ask, for the purposes of this question and answer session, that we really have to stick to the idea of the laws, specifically having to do with photography and video and documenting that and how we can use that to make stronger cases for animals and bring it.
I think you have to bring other things in the picture, like the environment,